So you're in recovery and that 5 o'clock drinking hour rolls around. What do? There's no ritual, there's no reward, there's no numbing, and I've got to figure out what to do with my time. We've talked a little bit about developing pillars in recovery, and what we're going to do today is talk about the pillar of structure, but we're going to also add the concept of self-care. I can tell you that empty hour at 5 o'clock or whatever that drinking time was for you, it isn't a character defect, it's really a nervous system issue. And the antidote to that is going to be structure. So I'm going to walk you through some of my daily routine and what I did, and also how I developed long-term strategy for how I would operate during the evenings when I was most susceptible to having those cravings and a potential relapse. And what I learned to do is to replace that happy hour thought with really some real, what I would call real self-care. So in the recovery therapist, my goal is to bridge that clinical scientific component with some of the real lived experience and how that all works. The goal for this video is to talk about that bookend concept that we talked about in the previous video. So what do we do with our mornings? We're going to expand on that a little bit. We're also going to talk about that happy hour component. We're going to talk about that sleep hygiene, and we're going to talk about how do we weave some of those micro self-care moments into our daily life so we can reduce stress as the day goes on and it doesn't build up and end up like a tidal wave at 5 o'clock when it's time to drink. So a couple things. Number one, I was told early on that my mind was like a bad neighborhood and you never wanted to go in there alone. What that means to me is that I've got to start making plans so that I'm just not out there letting the day unfold with not anything to do or having anything in place. The second thing, I want to redefine what self-care is. Normally, I think we kind of think about it as maybe day spas or having a bubble bath or just, you know, having those moments that we're kind to ourselves. And I think there are certainly parts of that. In recovery, it's really about being disciplined. To me, the highest form of self-care is predictability. We know that the day isn't necessarily going to always go as we planned, and that's okay. But we do need to plan some plans and try to stick to them as best we can. So we have a predictable day, so I'm not allowing the unknown to kind of creep in. For me, that was when I ran into some problems because not having anything in place left my mind to kind of wander. And again, it would typically wander into that bad neighborhood where all of a sudden drinking sounded like a pretty good idea. Structure isn't about being rigid. It's really about, again, putting those plans in place, setting an expectation for myself. What's it going to be like today as I work on my recovery path? The day is, what we're going to try to do as we structure it, is we're going to build like this safety container. As I put that structure around what my day is, those safety container components are going to be the things that we talked about. How do I start my morning? What do I do at 5 o'clock? How am I managing my sleep? And also those micro self-care moments during the day. Those will be the container pieces, and my sobriety is going to fit inside of that. Let's talk about bookending the container. We'll talk about our morning and then our evening rituals as we set up those times to make sure that we remain occupied and giving myself something to do. I will tell you that early on, recovery is really effortful. I spent a lot of time thinking about, what's that mean? Why am I doing that? This event is happening and I'm thinking this way. And so it takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort. And I start to implement and practice those recovery type behaviors. They're not necessarily first, second, or third nature to me. They're really kind of odd because my natural instinct is to go find a substance or a drink to help me numb that feeling or get out of that emotion that I'm dealing with. And so I'm having to put a lot of effort and time in and acknowledge that this is hard. It's not an easy task. But what I found is once I get practice at doing this, it becomes much easier. And as recovery starts to kind of move down the path, it certainly becomes a lot less effortful. The thing I equate it to is I have an event, it happens, I spend a lot of time thinking about, what do I need to do? What's recovery look like with this, and how do I implement? And then I go and I implement. What I find is all of a sudden I'm successful at that, and it's like, okay, look, I was able to do that. And then later on, something similar will come along. Instead of having to spend a lot of time and effort trying to figure out, okay, what should I do? How should I do it? I reflect back on, oh, this is similar to what that other event was, and this is what I did, and it seemed to work out okay, so let me try that again. And what I found is by doing that, it does really become less effortful as I start to practice these and get skilled at these recovery type behaviors. In the last video, we kind of covered a lot of this material. I think it's important that we revisit some of this and beginning with how are we going to set our day? When I wake up, what I really want to try to do is take some time and figure out what do I want to do today to be sober today? And I want to try to set my day. And so generally that means that I'm not going to grab my phone and start scrolling through that first thing. I'm going to spend a little bit of time, 5 to 15 minutes, maybe doing some self-meditation or reading some sort of inspirational message and really kind of process what's my day going to be like. I set up that ritual in the morning. What's my recovery look like? Reinforce this idea. It's one day at a time, and my goal today is just not drink today. I'm not going to worry about what's going to happen in the future. I'm not going to sit and dwell on the past. I really need to focus on what do I need to do today to stay sober today, and really kind of focus in on that. And that sets my perspective, really starts off the morning with, okay, I'm really focused on recovery. Also in setting my day, I'm also going to think through what do I need to be doing today? What are those moments where I need to be hitting certain marks? Whether that's maybe at lunch where I'm going to go for a walk just to get some exercise, burn some energy. What I'm going to do tonight when I get home from work. Am I going to get to a meeting? Am I going to focus on recovery type exercise, whether that's journaling? But I kind of try to plan out my day in regards to what my recovery looks like. Also acknowledging that there are certain things throughout my day that I also have to accomplish, and how are those going to fit into my recovery, and what do I need to be aware of as those things start to occur to make sure that I'm not getting overstressed, I'm not getting overwhelmed, I'm not getting frustrated, I'm not getting angry, and ensuring that I'm able to incorporate the positive behavior that I need to get through my day without drinking. So the next part of the container I want to talk about is replacing the danger zone. Generally, this is kind of that period where we started our drinking or started kind of thinking about drinking. And what we want to do is we want to move from passive type behaviors to more active self-care behaviors. Passive versus active, what we really are talking about here is, for me, a passive behavior is going to be where I just kind of collapse on the couch and I'm not, maybe scrolling and I'm not really thinking about something. I've got the TV on in the background. And what that allows for is my brain to start kind of processing information. And generally when it's left to its own devices to process information, I know for me in early recovery, it tended to want to process how can I justify my drinking. Trying to incorporate more active type self-care is going to be something that encourages me to process information while also doing something with my body that requires me to do both. So an example might be, I plan to go to a meeting, so I know that I'm going to have to get in the car and drive and process at the meeting, listening to other people and thinking about what I'm going to talk about and hearing other people's experience about their recovery. Another example might be working on a hobby, something that's going to make you focus on what's going on with your hands and also kind of think through as you're having to do whatever that hobby requires. Maybe it's calling someone who's safe and having a conversation. It can be as simple as if you like to prepare food. In creating a recipe, there's a process that you kind of have to go through which forces you to think, okay, what's my next step? And maybe it's something as simple as going for a walk, and in that process of going through a walk, we practice what is called grounding. And what that does is I'm paying attention to my environment. So I'm walking, but I'm also forcing myself to identify what's going on in my environment, which again takes me out of that brain space where my brain wants to think about drinking. Instead, I'm thinking about, okay, there's the neighbor, there's a car, there's a house. Really trying to ground me into that moment is really about engaging your body and your brain together and not allowing one or the other to not be engaged during this process. The next thing I want to focus on is how do we set ourselves up to sleep? Sleep becomes extremely important because I know for me, if I don't feel like I had a good night's sleep, the next day can be a little bit of a challenge. I find myself a little bit emotionally heightened and irritable. So starting this whole process, we know that alcohol and other substances can really mess up our sleep, and it's going to take us a little while to get back into a regular sleep cycle. So we can start to integrate what I call good sleep hygiene into this process. We're coming in for a landing, we're on our glide path, and so what can we do in order to start to stimulate our brain in a way that tells it it's time to go to sleep? You guys are probably familiar with melatonin, and melatonin that you can buy over the counter. So melatonin is also a chemical in our brain. It helps us fall asleep. We can start to help some of that process by telling our body, hey, we're getting ready to go to sleep. Here's our process. Some of those things we can do to process our sleep is, number one, we can take a warm shower. Again, we're now signaling our brain, we're telling our brain, hey, we're getting into this pattern that means we're getting ready to go to sleep, and it starts to introduce those cycles that help us fall asleep. So we take a warm shower. Then maybe we do some sort of sleepy time tea where it's decaffeinated. Again, we're sending signals to the brain, hey, we're getting ready for bed. Maybe we do some sort of light reading. Again, I'm going to encourage you to stay away from tablets or phones that have a bright light, because that can kind of mess with our brain chemistry as well. So maybe a book, and then when you get ready for sleep, when you're getting pretty close to it, you can do progressive relaxation, which basically is you start at the bottom with your feet and you tighten up the muscle, and then you relax and you work your way up, and you go to your calf and you tighten it up and relax, and then you just work your way all the way up through your body where you're tightening up the muscle and then relaxing. And by the end of it, any kind of racing thoughts have kind of gone away because I've been focusing on my body, and I'm also in a relaxed state. What I would encourage is, now you give yourself about 15-20 minutes to fall asleep. And if you can't fall asleep, then you need to get up out of bed and go sit somewhere and continue to read. Because what we want to do is we want to send a signal to our brain that the bed's where we sleep. It's not where we stay awake and read. It's where I go to sleep. You know, go read for a little bit until you get tired, and then go back to your bed and lay back down and try to sleep. And again, if you can't, then get back up and go read for a little bit and come back. It's going to take a little while for us to get back into a regular sleep cycle. A lot of times when we were drinking to sleep, we would be able to get into a deep sleep, but we wouldn't have that REM sleep. Alcohol affects REM sleep, which is where the body does its repair work. We need to make sure that we get into regular sleep cycles, because we really do need to get some of that repair work done. But it's going to take anywhere from a week to 3 weeks in order for us to get back into some regular sleep cycles. So that's really frustrating in early recovery, because I want to sleep, but my body tends to be fighting me. I'm really tired, but some reason I can't seem to fall asleep. Let's start setting up that ritual, that sleep cycle hygiene, so we can get into some sleep and get back into our regular pattern of sleep, which is really important for us in early recovery, and really throughout my life. I would say that sleep has been important for me. With this sleep pattern, it is really a form of self-care. It's the discipline of setting that strategy up. This is how I'm going to move forward in regards to letting my body know it's time to sleep. So the last thing I want to touch on is what I would call some micro self-care. This is basically kind of taking your inventory. Where are you at? Every couple, 3 hours, taking 5 minutes to just kind of reflect, how am I doing right now? If I need to intervene and do something in order to address whatever's going on, let's do that at that point in time. We have a tendency to not address some of that stuff, and what can happen is it's like a big wave, and it pushes up, and at the end of the day, I'm totally stressed out because I haven't really addressed stuff as it came along. I just kind of muscled my way through it and kept going. We can start to set up these incremental moments where I have time to reflect, and we're going to go back to that O-H.A.L.T, right? So that overwhelmed, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. When we have these micro 5-minute reflections of how am I doing, and am I feeling any of those? And if I am, let's address them. If I'm feeling overwhelmed, maybe I need to take a step back and take a brief 5-minute or 10-minute walk and just kind of back away from whatever is going on that's making me feel overwhelmed. If I'm hungry, maybe I grab a snack. If I'm angry, maybe I'm going to do some quick journaling and kind of jot that stuff down and get that out of my system. If I'm lonely, pick up the phone, I'm going to call somebody and say, hey, how are you doing? Let me tell you about my day. And then obviously if I'm tired, maybe I'd close my eyes for a few minutes and just get a little brief, a little cat nap or respite in. I think these become really important, not only because it helps with addressing those things in the moment and in the time, but I also think it's really important because we're not used to doing this kind of stuff where I'm being reflective, where I'm kind of going inside myself and say, what's going on with me today? What is happening? And it's getting me to start to pay attention to my emotions and to start to address them instead of just kind of shoving them off to the side and I'll worry about that later. And what that does is I end up just kind of stuffing those feelings, and I stuff them and I stuff them and I stuff them until I can't stuff them anymore. And then I usually try to stuff them some more. And eventually they kind of come out sideways. And that's a red flag for me to relapse. So I need to start paying attention to my emotions. Part of, I think, recovery and sobriety is and emotionally regulate how I'm operating. Again, it's okay to be angry. I just don't want to be angry to the point where I'm putting holes in the wall. I want to manage my emotions in an effective way so they don't get crazy out of control, which typically is a red flag or a reason for me to go drink. Again, I think it's just kind of pure insight when I'm able to pay attention to why I do what I do and asking myself, why am I feeling this way? And what can I do to address it? Part of that recovery spot is trying to address our denial. We talked a little bit about being honest, and honest is really being honest with myself. What's really going on? Am I feeling a certain way? Why am I feeling that way? Am I operating out of fear? I know in early recovery for me, there was a lot of fear that just kind of ran roughshod throughout my daily life. It was a rational fear, but yet it seemed to just kind of take over. And before you know it, I was so fearful that, hey, drink sounds like a great idea. So I've got to start to manage some of that fear. And a lot of the ways I can do that is just really gaining insight about how I operate, how I think. I do want to share, I know for me, I was reflecting back and I just remember that in early recovery, I got to think for 9 months to a year, it just seemed like every day I was thinking about drinking. It was just always there. And it progressively got less and less, but I do remember this idea that, am I always going to think about alcohol? And at the time, the answer was yes. But what I found out was at some point in time, I didn't think about it. And I distinctly remember that I'd gone like a day or two without thinking about alcohol before I even recognized it. I was like, holy smokes, man, I haven't thought about alcohol. That is so awesome. So don't be alarmed if you continue to think about alcohol. We have used alcohol. It has been our way of dealing with life. It has been our coping strategy. And part of what we're trying to do now is we're trying to put new behaviors in place. And instead of using alcohol to address those behaviors, I'm now doing other things to address those behaviors. And I'm gaining new experiences. And so this whole process is about me gaining new experiences, me gaining new sober experiences, because then I can replace those drinking experiences. Worked with a lot of folks that, maybe they're concerned about going home for the holidays or, spending their first New Year's without alcohol. And they're like, okay, I've got, I'm not going to drink. I'm in this sober place. What's that mean? Am I going to be able to do it? And they get kind of worked up and maybe a little fearful about it. And so we talk about what's our plan? How are we going to do that? If I'm in a place where, I don't want to be, do I have the ability to leave? I want to make sure that, maybe I drive, so I have that ability if it gets too uncomfortable that I can grab the keys and go, or, let my spouse know, hey, if I give you the signal, we need to go. And so we're all kind of in tune and understanding what's going on. And traditionally what's happened is when they come back to, to talk about and process how that event went, most of the time they're like, wasn't that big of a deal. And that's awesome because now I've got this experience. I've got this experience now where I've done New Year's where I haven't had to drink and it wasn't a big deal. And I can use that in ways as we move forward. What's going to happen when my birthday comes around? Am I going to be able to not drink? Or, I've never drank, I've never been sober on the 4th of July. Well, remember when you were trying to figure out how New Year's Eve was going to go for you? That worked out okay. Why don't we just kind of implement the same plan, right? And so this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier is early recovery is effortful. We make those choices, we figure out ways to address things that are different, and then if we're successful, then we can implement those in maybe similar events moving forward. All right, so let's pull this all together. We're going to have the structural self-care container. And so what we talked about is, how am I going to start my day? How am I going to set my day? What's that look like? Am I going to get up in the morning, do a little maybe meditation, do a little thoughtful writing, do some breathing? Make sure that you maybe hydrate first thing in the morning, and you want to stay away from your phone or hopping on any kind of social. Again, I want to set the message that my recovery is important, so I'm going to do these disciplined things. I may not necessarily think they're the most awesome things or the most entertaining things, but they are things that I do that ends up sending a message that my recovery is important. The next I want to talk about are those micro self-care moments, again, throughout the day as I'm working my day, taking some time every hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, and I'm stopping and giving myself a little respite and thinking about where am I at right now? Do I need to do anything to address that? Next is how do I manage that danger zone moment, right? So from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock or whenever that drinking time was. And I will share with you for me, and I think for a lot of folks, that danger zone starts before I start drinking, and that idea creeps in there about, hey, we can go drink, it's happy hour, let's go do this, and those cravings start to kind of seep in. So I want to make sure that I've got plans in place, so when that craving does seep in, I can say, well, no, I can't do that because I'm going to be doing XYZ. I've got this hobby that I've got to do. I've got a meeting I got to attend to. I've got to go, I'm going to go take a walk, or I'm going to go to the gym. I've got these other things in place, so I don't really have time to do that. So the last thing I want to do is at night is to set up some good sleep hygiene so I get into a regular sleep cycle. And that begins with making sure that I consistently have a bedtime that I'm trying to hit, and that it's not contingent upon what's on TV or what's going on. It's no, I'm going to go to bed now at 10 o'clock every night. And so at 9 o'clock, I'm going to start my wind down, and I'm going to start doing these things, whatever those things are for you. Introducing that new concept of a good sleep hygiene. And I think those 4 things, if we start to implement them, will occupy some time for us now. And again, as I said, the drinking idea stayed with me for quite some time, but I also had these other things that I was starting to implement that helped me work through that moment when that idea would pop in my head that says, hey, let's go drink. I'm like, yeah, no, I've got these other things that's more important. You're not failing if 5 o'clock is still hard for you. You're learning, you're going through that process. Your brain is doing what it's been doing for a long period of time. We're retraining our brain to not use alcohol as a way to deal with my life. I am now trying to incorporate new ways to deal with my life that are a lot healthier, both for mind and for body. So I want to just let you know that a lot of times this maybe feels like I'm swimming across the ocean without a life jacket. There's a lot of effort that is going on. I would also say that putting this stuff into play probably feels a little mechanical. There's a concept that we talk about, it's fake it till you make it. And again, we may not feel it right away, but we continue to try that process. And eventually what happens is by doing it over and over and over again, it does become comfortable. It does become our way of life. So again, we practice whatever this is that we put into play, whatever those structures are, whatever that container is, we put those in play, and we try to be disciplined, do those on a regular basis. And by doing that, eventually, it really does become our way of life. And that's what we're working towards is, again, looking for a new way of life where I don't use alcohol or I don't use substances to manage me and to deal with whatever life is throwing at me. I hope that you're finding some success in your journey. Moving forward, I want to talk a little bit about cravings and maybe relapse, and what do we do and how do we manage some of that stuff. Unfortunately, recovery isn't necessarily a straight line. It can have its ups and downs and kind of our setbacks, but we want to try to just keep moving forward. Maybe fall back a little bit. That's okay. It's not failure. It's just education. We're learning. We're learning how to do stuff differently. This is foreign. This is not how we've dealt with our life for a long time. And so it feels a little off. It feels a little weird. But that, I'll tell you, is exactly where you're supposed to be. As much as I hated people telling me that, but it was. What I found out was, yeah, that's, yeah, it is awkward. It is uncomfortable. I will also share that recovery has been awesome. My worst day sober is better than my best day drunk. I appreciate y'all being here. You guys have an awesome rest of your day, whenever and whatever that is, and get some sleep tonight.